Blood dripped onto the marble floor of the hidden sanctuary, each drop echoing through the cavernous space like a death knell. And Brielle Sinclair realized with horror that the wounded figure slumped against the stone archway was no ordinary man but the vampire king himself. She had stumbled into this place by accident, fleeing from a mugging gone wrong in the alley behind her apartment building. The old iron door she'd wrenched open in desperation had led not to another building, but to a descending spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, lit by torches that burned with an eerie blue flame. Now she stood frozen in a grand hall that belonged in a Gothic cathedral, watching as the most beautiful and terrifying creature she'd ever seen pressed one pale hand against a gaping wound in his side. His hair fell like spun silver around a face carved from moonlight and shadow, his eyes the color of fresh blood when they lifted to meet hers. He wore black combat gear torn and stained, revealing skin that gleamed like polished marble beneath the damage. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "You should not be here, mortal." Brielle's nursing training kicked in before her common sense could stop her. She'd been working emergency room rotations for the past 2 years, and a bleeding patient was a bleeding patient, supernatural or not. She crossed the space between them in quick strides, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "You're hurt. Let me help." He actually laughed, though the sound turned into a grimace of pain. "I am Valdren Nocturne, king of the Eternal Court. I do not require help from a human child who wandered where she does not belong." "Well, Valdren Nocturne, king of whatever, you're bleeding all over your fancy floor, and that wound looks deep enough to be serious even for someone like you." She dropped to her knees beside him, already assessing the damage with a clinical eye. "Now are you going to let me help? Or are you going to bleed out because you're too proud to accept basic medical attention?" Something flickered in those crimson eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that managed to be both regal and mocking. "Very well, but know that if you prove to be an assassin, I will drain you dry before you can land a second blow." Noted. Brielle pulled off her jacket and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding. "What happened?" "A disagreement with the Council of the Northern Territories. They believe my reign has become too soft, too tolerant of human life. They sent their best warriors to make their point." His jaw tightened as she applied pressure. "I made my own point in return, though not without cost." She worked quickly, examining the wounds with steady hands. There were 3 major lacerations across his torso, along with numerous smaller cuts that were already beginning to heal. The big ones, though, would need attention. "I need supplies, clean water, bandages, something to sterilize the wounds." Valdren gestured toward a doorway on the far side of the hall. "Through there, you will find my personal chambers. There's a bathroom with everything you require." He paused, studying her face. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," Brielle admitted, "but fear doesn't stop bleeding, and sitting here shaking won't help either of us. So I'll panic later after I've made sure you're not going to die." "I cannot die so easily." "Great. Then this should be even easier than I thought." She found the bathroom and tried not to gape at the sheer opulence of it. Everything was black marble and gold fixtures, with a bathtub large enough to swim in. She gathered towels, found a first aid kit that looked like it had never been used, and filled a basin with warm water before returning to where Valdren waited. He had managed to pull himself into a sitting position against the wall, his head tilted back and eyes closed. In repose, he looked almost peaceful, though no less dangerous. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his lips pale against the white of his skin. When she knelt beside him again, those eyes opened and fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What's your name, little healer?" Brielle Sinclair." Brielle. He spoke it like a prayer or a curse, she couldn't tell which. "An unusual name. Says the guy named Valdren." She set down the basin and began carefully cleaning the blood from his skin. "This is going to hurt. I have endured worse." She believed him. As she worked, she could see old scars beneath the new wounds, faint silver lines that marked his flesh like a map of past battles. Her fingers were gentle as she cleaned each cut, and she noticed how he tensed beneath her touch. Not from pain, but something else entirely. "Your hands are warm," he said quietly. "Most people's are." She rinsed the cloth and continued working, moving from his torso to his arms. When was the last time someone touched you like this? Gently, I mean. The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I cannot remember. Something in her chest tightened. She looked up at his face and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Vulnerability, maybe, mixed with wonder and something darker that made her pulse quicken. Well, that's just sad, she said, keeping her tone light. Everyone deserves gentle touches now and then, even vampire kings who probably have dozens of people ready to kill them at any moment. Hundreds, he corrected with a ghost of a smile. I am not well loved by my enemies. But you have allies? People who support you? I have subjects who obey because they fear me, and counselors who advise because it grants them power. Whether any would call themselves my ally is debatable. He watched as she wrung out the cloth again. Why do you help me, Brielle Sinclair? You know what I am. You must know the danger you are in simply by being here. She had been asking herself the same question. The logical answer was that she was a nurse, trained to help anyone in need. But that wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. There was something about him, something that called to her despite every instinct screaming that she should run. Because you need help, she finally said, and because when you looked at me just now, you didn't look like a king. You looked like someone who's been fighting alone for too long. His hand came up suddenly, catching her wrist with a grip that was firm but not painful. His skin was cool against hers, smooth as silk. You see too much, little one. Occupational hazard. Nurses learn to read people pretty quickly. She didn't pull away from his touch, even though she probably should have. Now let me finish so I can bandage these properly. He released her, but she could feel his gaze following her every movement as she worked. She cleaned the wounds thoroughly, then applied antibiotic ointment from the first aid kit. When she began wrapping bandages around his torso, he had to lean forward, bringing their faces close enough that she could feel his breath on her cheek. This is intimate, he observed, his voice low and rough. It's medical care, she countered, though her hands trembled slightly as she tied off the bandage. There's a difference. Is there? His hand came to rest on her waist, steadying her as she reached around him. Your heart is racing, Brielle. I can hear it. I can smell the heat of your blood rushing through your veins. She pulled back to look at him, finding his face inches from hers. Those red eyes held her captive, and she could see flecks of gold in their depths that caught the torchlight. Are you trying to scare me or seduce me? Because right now I can't tell which. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. His thumb traced a small circle against her hip, the touch light enough to be almost innocent. You fascinate me. Humans usually cower or flee. You knelt beside me and demanded to help as if you had every right to be here. Someone had to. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, moving to bandage the wounds on his arms. You said the Northern Territories think you're too soft on humans. What did you do to make them think that? I stopped the cullings. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. Brielle's hands stilled. Cullings? For centuries, vampires have maintained control through fear and violence. Every generation, the courts would sweep through human populations, killing enough to remind them of their place in the natural order. His jaw tightened. When I took the throne 50 years ago, I ended the practice. I decreed that humans were not cattle to be slaughtered at will, that any vampire who killed without cause would face punishment. That's why they attacked you. They see it as weakness, as betrayal of our nature. He looked down at his bandaged torso. Perhaps they are right. Brielle grabbed his chin, forcing him to meet her eyes. The boldness of the gesture surprised them both, but she didn't let go. Don't you dare. Choosing mercy over massacre isn't weakness, it's strength, it's evolution, it's being better than the monsters who came before you. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was a real smile, not the mocking curve from before, and it transformed his entire face. He looked younger, almost boyish, despite the ancient power that radiated from him. You are remarkable, he said softly, and absolutely foolish for touching a vampire king so casually. Yeah, well, I've never been great at self-preservation. She released his chin and sat back on her heels. The wounds are clean and bandaged. With your healing abilities, they should close up pretty quickly, but you need to rest and probably feed to restore your strength. Practical advice. He stood in one fluid motion, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so recently injured. Come, I will see you safely home before I attend to such matters. Wait. Brielle scrambled to her feet. That's it? You're just going to send me away and pretend this never happened? What would you have me do? His expression had shuddered again, becoming the mask of a king rather than the vulnerable man from moments before. Keep you here? Make you a prisoner in my court? You have seen our sanctuary, learned of our politics. By our laws, you should be executed to preserve our secrecy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin defiantly. Then why haven't you? Because I am too soft, remember? The words were bitter. Because you helped me when you had no reason to, and I will not repay kindness with death. But you cannot stay, Brielle. This world is not meant for you. What if I want to stay? The question hung in the air between them, dangerous and impossible. Valdren's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of his surprise. You do not know what you are asking. Maybe not. But I know that up there, in my world, I go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat. I save lives when I can and watch people die when I can't. It's necessary work, but it's lonely. And tonight, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She took a step toward him. Tell me you didn't feel it too. That connection. What I felt is irrelevant, but his voice lacked conviction. Even if I wanted to keep you here, which would be the height of selfishness, my court would never accept it. A human in the palace of the vampire king? They would see it as the ultimate insult. Let them. She closed the distance between them until she could touch his chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. You're the king, aren't you? Make them accept it. His hand covered hers, and for a moment, she thought he might agree. Then, he gently moved her hand aside and stepped back. No, I've brought enough chaos to my court with my reforms. I will not add to it by installing a human as what exactly? My pet? My lover? My equal? He shook his head. There is no role for you here that would not demean us both. The rejection stung more than it should have, given that she'd known him for less than an hour, but something had sparked between them in the darkness of that hall, something real and powerful that defied logic. She could see in his eyes that he felt it too, which made his refusal even more painful. Fine, she said quietly. Take me home. The journey back through the winding passages was silent and awkward. Valdren led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, past rooms that glimpsed lives she could only imagine. She saw other vampires in some of the chambers they passed, all with that same pale, ethereal beauty. They stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and hostility that made her very aware of how out of place she was. Finally, they reached a different door than the one she'd entered through. When Valdren opened it, she saw it led to an alley 3 blocks from her apartment. The mortal world beyond looked grimy and ordinary after the gothic splendor of the vampire sanctuary. This door will not open from this side again, Valdren said. Forget what you have seen tonight. Live your mortal life and be grateful you survived an encounter with my kind. Brielle wanted to argue, to fight, to demand he give them a chance, but the exhaustion of the night was catching up with her, and she could see the finality in his expression. Instead, she simply nodded and stepped through the doorway. Brielle. She turned back to find him silhouetted in the doorframe, looking every inch the immortal king he was. Yes? Thank you. For your kindness, for your touch. I will not forget it. Then the door closed, and she was alone in the alley with nothing but the sound of distant traffic and the memory of crimson eyes. She made it home and collapsed into bed still wearing her blood-stained clothes. Sleep should have been impossible, but her body had other ideas. She fell into dreams filled with silver hair and pale skin, gentle touches in the darkness, and a loneliness that echoed her own. When she woke the next morning, she half convinced herself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, but her jacket was still gone, left behind in that underground palace, and there were bruises on her knees from kneeling on the marble floor. It had been real. All of it. She went through the motions of her day in a daze. Her shift at the hospital blurred into meaningless routine. Patients came and went, wounds were treated, forms were filled out. None of it seemed to matter anymore. She kept thinking about Valdren, wondering if he was healed, if he'd faced more attacks, if he thought about her at all. 3 days passed like this. Then, on her walk home from work, she noticed a figure waiting in the shadows near her building. Her heart leaped, but as the person stepped into the light, she saw it wasn't Valdren. This vampire was female, with the same pale skin and white hair, but eyes of deep violet instead of red. Brielle Sinclair. The vampire's voice was cultured and cold. "I am Seraphine, first counselor to King Valdren. I would speak with you." Every instinct told Brielle to run, but she forced herself to stand still. About what? About the king, of course. You treated his wounds 3 nights ago. Since then, he has been distracted, unfocused. He sits in his chambers staring at nothing, neglects his duties, and speaks of matters that concern me greatly. Seraphine moved closer, and Brielle caught the scent of night-blooming flowers. "What did you do to him, human?" "I bandaged his wounds, that's all. Do not lie to me." The vampire's eyes flashed dangerously. "I have served Valdren for 2 centuries. I know when something has shaken him. And you, little mortal, have somehow managed to do what countless enemies could not. You have made him doubt." "Doubt what?" "Everything. His duty, his crown, his place in our world." Seraphine's expression was unreadable. "He asked me tonight if there was any precedent for a vampire king taking a human consort." Brielle's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that it has never been done, and for good reason. Our kinds are too different. A human would age and die while he remained unchanging. The court would never accept such a union. It would be seen as the ultimate degradation of the throne." She paused, and yet when I said these things, he looked at me with such emptiness that I feared I had lost him entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to understand what power you hold over him, so that I can either break it or help him navigate it." Seraphine's gaze was penetrating. "Do you care for him? Or is this some scheme? Are you working with his enemies to destabilize his rule from within?" The accusation was absurd enough to make Brielle laugh. "I'm a nurse. I work 12-hour shifts for barely enough money to pay my rent. I have no connections to vampire politics, no hidden agenda, and no idea how to destabilize anything more complicated than a house of cards." "Then why does he speak of you as if you have become the center of his world?" "I don't know." The admission hurt. I touched him gently, and he acted like it was the first kindness he'd received in centuries. Maybe it was. Maybe being king has made him so isolated that one moment of real human connection broke something open inside him. She met Seraphine's eyes directly. "But I didn't do it on purpose, and I don't know how to fix it." The vampire studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "You are honest, at least, and braver than most mortals I have encountered. Very well, Brielle Sinclair. I will take you to him, and we will see if this connection between you is strong enough to survive the reality of what it would mean." "Wait, what? Now? Unless you have more pressing engagements?" Seraphine's tone was dry. "The king is destroying himself slowly, and I would prefer to resolve this matter before it impacts his ability to rule. So yes, now." Brielle should have argued, should have demanded time to process or prepare. Instead, she found herself nodding. "Okay, take me to him." The path Seraphine led her down was different from the one she'd used before, entering through a basement entrance of an old cathedral that had been abandoned for decades. The sanctuary beneath was vast and beautiful, lit by thousands of candles that cast dancing shadows on walls carved with ancient symbols. They passed through hall after hall, each more opulent than the last, until finally they reached a set of massive doors guarded by 2 vampire sentries. Both looked at Brielle with open hostility, but Seraphine waved them aside. "The king is expecting visitors," she said smoothly, which was clearly a lie, but the guards stepped back. Inside, Brielle found herself in a chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling soared impossibly high, painted with murals of night skies and ancient battles. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with volumes that looked centuries old. And in the center of it all, standing before a window that showed the city lights above, was Valdren. He was dressed differently than before, in formal black clothing that emphasized the otherworldly perfection of his form. His silver hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. When he turned at the sound of the doors opening, his expression shifted from surprise to something raw and hungry. Brielle. Just her name, but the way he said it made her knees weak. She was aware of Seraphine withdrawing and closing the doors behind her, leaving them alone. The silence stretched taut as they stared at each other across the room. "You brought her here?" Valdren's voice was directed at the closed door, though his eyes never left Brielle's face. "Without warning me?" "You were moping, my king. I took action." Seraphine's voice drifted through the wood. "I will ensure you are not disturbed." Valdren closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering patience. When he opened them again, they were softer. "You should not be here." "So I keep being told." Brielle walked further into the room, drawn to him like a moth to flame. "But here I am anyway. Seraphine said you've been distracted." "Seraphine meddles in matters that are not her concern. She cares about you, that's allowed." Brielle stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. "She said you asked about human consorts." "I should not have done so. It gave her false hope that there might be a solution to—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. "To what?" Brielle pressed. "To this thing between us? Because I've been going crazy too, you know. I can't stop thinking about you. Can't sleep without dreaming about your face. I've known you for one night, Valdren, and somehow you've become more real to me than anything else in my life." "Do you know what you were saying?" He moved toward her suddenly, closing the distance in a blur of supernatural speed that should have frightened her, but instead made her pulse race with anticipation. "Do you understand what it would mean to bind yourself to me? You would be giving up your normal life, your safety, your chance at a mortal future. My enemies would see you as a weakness to exploit. My allies would see you as an insult to our traditions. And I—" His hand came up to cup her cheek, the touch achingly gentle. "I would watch you age and die while I remained unchanged. Would have to endure the loss of you knowing I had stolen your brief human life for my own selfish desires. What if I turned?" The words came out before she could stop them. "What if I became like you?" His hand fell away as if she'd burned him. "No, absolutely not. Why not? It would solve everything." "It would solve nothing and create new horrors." He turned away from her, his whole body rigid. "The turning is not some simple gift, Brielle. It is agony. 3 days of feeling your human body die piece by piece while something dark and hungry takes its place. Many do not survive it. Of those who do, some lose their minds to the bloodlust and must be destroyed. And even if you survived intact, you would no longer be the woman I—" He stopped himself. "You would be changed in ways neither of us can predict. But I would be with you." She moved to stand in front of him again, refusing to let him hide. "Isn't that worth something?" "Not if it destroys who you are." His hands gripped her shoulders, and she could feel the tremor in them. "I am a monster, Brielle. I have lived for 300 years, and I have done terrible things. I have killed, I have conquered, I have ruled with an iron fist when necessary. The only good I have managed is to stop the worst excesses of my kind, but that does not make me worthy of someone like you, someone pure and kind and full of light." "I'm not pure," she laughed shakily. "I'm human. I'm messy and complicated, and sometimes I make bad choices, like falling for a vampire king I barely know." Brielle. Her name was a groan, halfway between prayer and curse. "Tell me you don't feel it too," she challenged. "Tell me I'm alone in this and I'll walk away right now. I'll go back to my normal life and try to forget you ever existed." For a long moment, he was silent. Then he pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her with a fierceness that bordered on desperation. "I cannot tell you that, because I feel it too, this impossible connection that should not exist. I have felt it from the moment you knelt beside me and demanded to help, from the moment your warm hands touched my skin and made me remember what it was to be treated with tenderness instead of fear." She buried her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him. He smelled like night air and old books with an underlying sweetness she couldn't identify. "So what do we do?" "I do not know." His hand stroked through her hair, the gesture tentative, as if he feared she might vanish. "In all my years, I have never felt so uncertain. Every choice seems fraught with danger. Yet the thought of letting you go is unbearable. Brielle pulled back enough to look up at his face. Then don't let me go. Keep me here. Let me be part of your world. As what? My secret shame? A human pet hidden away from the court? His expression was pained. You deserve better than that. Then make me something more. Introduce me to the court. Make them accept me. You're the king, Valdren. Use that power. It is not so simple. The court is already fractured over my reforms. If I push them too far, there will be open rebellion. More will die, human and vampire alike. And all because I could not control my own desires. She could see the weight of responsibility crushing him, could feel the terrible choice he was trying to make between his duty and his heart. In that moment, she made her own choice. Then I'll leave. The words tasted like ashes. If keeping me here will hurt your people, will undermine everything you're trying to build, then I'll walk away. I'll go back to my life, and we can both try to forget this ever happened. His arms tightened around her. I told you once that I would not forget your kindness. How much less could I forget this? But perhaps you are right. Perhaps the kindest thing I can do for both of us is to let you go before we become so entangled that separation becomes impossible. They held each other in silence, both knowing they should step apart, but neither willing to make the first move. Brielle memorized the feel of him, the coolness of his skin, the impossible strength tempered by such careful gentleness. If this was all she could have, she would make it enough. The doors burst open suddenly, shattering the moment. Seraphine stood there, her face grave. My king, we have a situation. The northern territories have sent emissaries. They demand an audience immediately. Valdren released Brielle with obvious reluctance. Send them to the throne room. I will attend to them shortly. There is more. Seraphine's violet eyes flickered to Brielle and back. They know about the human. Word has spread among the courts that you harbor a mortal who walks freely through our sanctuary. They see it as proof of your weakness and have come to issue an ultimatum. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Valdren's expression became carved from ice, all traces of the vulnerable man from moments before, vanishing behind the mask of a king. What kind of ultimatum? Step down from the throne or face a formal challenge for the crown. They give you until moonrise tomorrow to decide. Brielle felt the blood drain from her face. This was her fault. Her presence had given his enemies the ammunition they needed to move against him. I should go, right now. If they know I'm gone, maybe they'll back down. It is too late for that. Valdren's voice was cold and controlled. They were always going to move against me. You simply provided a convenient excuse. He looked at Seraphine. Tell the emissaries I will meet them in 1 hour. Have the full court assembled. If they want a display of strength, I will give them one they will not soon forget. Seraphine bowed and departed swiftly. Alone again, Valdren turned to Brielle with an expression that was almost apologetic. You must stay here, in my private chambers. Do not leave for any reason. I will have guards posted who are loyal to me personally. You will be safe. What are you going to do? What I must. Defend my throne and protect my people, including you. He cupped her face in both hands, tilting it up so she had to meet his eyes. I am sorry, Brielle. Sorry that knowing me has placed you in danger. But I swear on whatever remains of my soul that I will not let them harm you. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you. If they challenge you and you're still hurt from the last battle, I am healed enough. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. And I am far more dangerous than they remember. They have mistaken mercy for weakness, compassion for cowardice. It is time to remind them why I hold this throne. He kissed her then, a fierce claiming that stole her breath and made her forget every reason this was a bad idea. His lips were cool and firm against hers, tasting of something dark and sweet. When he pulled away, his eyes had gone molten red. Wait for me, he commanded softly. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, stay here and wait. I will return to you. Then he was gone, moving with that impossible vampire speed that left her swaying in his wake. The doors closed behind him with a final boom, and she heard the sound of guards taking position outside. She was alone in the Vampire King's private chambers, trapped while he went to face who knew what dangers. Every instinct screamed at her to follow, to help somehow, but she forced herself to stay put. She would only be a liability in whatever was about to happen, a distraction he couldn't afford. Instead, she explored the room, trying to distract herself from her spiraling anxiety. The bookshelves drew her first, filled with volumes in languages she couldn't read and some she could. History texts, philosophy, poetry, even a few modern novels. She found a collection of medical texts from various eras and felt an odd flutter of warmth at the thought that Valdren might have been interested in healing. The window drew her next. It showed not the city above, but another part of the sanctuary, a courtyard garden filled with night-blooming flowers that glowed softly in the darkness. It was beautiful and strange, a reminder that this world operated by different rules than her own. Time crawled by. She had no way to know what was happening in the throne room, no updates or information. The guards outside her door were silent as statues when she tried to ask them questions. She was utterly cut off, and the waiting was torture. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only one, she heard footsteps approaching. The doors opened to admit Seraphine, who looked grim but not panicked. "The emissaries have departed. The king requests your presence in the throne room." Brielle's heart hammered. "Is he all right? What happened? Come and see for yourself." Seraphine's expression gave nothing away as she led Brielle through the winding corridors. The throne room was massive, easily 3 times the size of Valdren's chambers. The ceiling was lost in shadows, supported by pillars carved with scenes of vampire history. At the far end of the hall sat a throne of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And on that throne sat Valdren, looking every inch the immortal king. He was covered in blood. Brielle's training kicked in immediately. She crossed the throne room at a run, ignoring the assembled vampires who watched with expressions ranging from shock to approval. "What happened? Where are you hurt?" Valdren caught her hands before she could start examining him. "Peace, little healer. The blood is not mine." She looked more closely and realized he was right. There were no new wounds visible, and the blood was already drying on his clothes and skin. "Then, whose?" "The emissaries came with warriors, intending to take the throne by force if I did not submit." His voice was calm, almost casual. "I reminded them why that was an ill-advised strategy." Brielle looked around the throne room and noticed for the first time the scorch marks on the floor, the damaged pillars, the lingering scent of violence in the air. "You killed them." "Only 3. The others I sent back to the northern territories with a message. I will not be moved from this throne by threats or force. Any who wish to challenge my rule must do so according to our ancient laws in single combat before the assembled courts, and I will face any challenger they care to send." His crimson eyes found hers. "I also told them about you." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "I told them that I have taken a human consort, that she is under my personal protection, and that any who threaten her will answer to me directly. I have declared before the court that Brielle Sinclair stands beside me, now and for however long she chooses to remain." The room erupted in murmurs, dozens of vampires talking at once. Seraphine stepped forward, her expression complicated. "My king, this is extraordinarily irregular. The court will demand. The court will accept my decision or challenge me for the throne. Those are the only options." Valdren stood, pulling Brielle up with him. "I am done hiding what I want, done letting ancient prejudices dictate my choices. For 300 years I have sacrificed and compromised and bent to the will of tradition. No more." He turned to address the assembled vampires, his voice ringing with authority. "I am Valdren Nocturne, blood of the ancient line, victor of 100 battles, king of the eternal court. I have led you through wars and peace, through famine and plenty. I have spilled my blood for you, made enemies of those who would destroy us, and forged alliances that have kept us strong. In all that time, I have asked little for myself. Now I ask this: accept the woman I have chosen, or challenge me directly and face the consequences." The silence that followed was absolute. Brielle could feel the weight of hundreds of immortal gazes upon her, could sense the rage and disbelief and contempt directed her way. But she lifted her chin and stood tall beside Valdren, refusing to cower. Finally, an older vampire stepped forward. He had scars across his face and hands, marking him as a warrior. "I am Cassius, general of the Southern Legions. I have served under your rule for half a century, and I have never questioned your decisions. But this," he gestured at Brielle, "this is madness. She is human, mortal. She will die in the blink of an eye, and you would dishonor the throne for such a brief indulgence." "She is more than you see," Valdren replied evenly, "and I would rather have 50 years with her than an eternity alone on this throne. But I understand your concerns, Cassius. If you believe I am unfit to rule because of this choice, then challenge me. I will face you at moonrise tomorrow, and we will let combat decide who is right." Cassius studied them both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "I do not challenge you, my king. I merely wanted to hear you defend your choice with conviction. You have done so. If this human makes you strong rather than weak, then I will support your decision." He knelt, pressing his fist to his chest in a gesture of loyalty. Around the room, other vampires followed suit, though not all. Some remained standing, their expressions hostile, but enough knelt that the message was clear. Valdren still commanded the loyalty of his court, even with this unprecedented choice. Seraphine was the last to kneel, her violet eyes meeting Brielle's with something that might have been respect. "Long may you reign, King Valdren, and may your consort prove worthy of the chaos she has inspired." Valdren acknowledged their loyalty with a regal nod, then turned to Brielle. "Come, we have much to discuss, and you still appear ready to examine me for injuries, despite my assurances." He led her from the throne room, leaving the assembled court to process what had just happened. Once they were back in his private chambers with the doors securely closed, he sagged slightly, some of the regal bearing slipping. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done," he admitted. Brielle wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "You just declared me your consort in front of your entire court without asking me first. Would you have preferred I asked permission?" He looked genuinely uncertain. "I thought, after what we shared, after what you said about staying, I apologize if I presumed too much." "You didn't presume." She crossed to him and began unfastening his blood-soaked coat. "But we need to talk about what this means, what being your consort actually entails. It means you are mine and I am yours in the eyes of vampire law. It means my protection extends to you absolutely, and any who harm you harm me. It means you will live here, in the sanctuary, and be treated with the respect due to my chosen partner." He let her remove his coat, then his shirt. Standing bare-chested while she examined him for injuries she knew she wouldn't find. "It means we will face whatever comes together. And when I age, when I get old and you stay young." She ran her hands over his skin, checking the wounds from before and finding them completely healed. "What happens then?" "I do not know. Perhaps we will find a way to extend your life without turning you. There are old magics, forgotten rituals, or perhaps we will simply treasure whatever time we have and accept that some loves are meant to be brief but blazing." His hands covered hers, stilling them. "But that is a concern for the future. For now, I just want to be with you, to learn who you are beyond the kind healer who saved my life." Brielle looked up at him, at this ancient, powerful being who somehow looked at her like she held the secrets of the universe. "I'm not that interesting. You know, I'm just a nurse who works too much and doesn't have enough friends and watches terrible reality TV when I'm too tired to do anything else." "You are endlessly fascinating to me." He traced the line of her jaw with one finger. "Tell me about your terrible reality television. Tell me about your work and your lack of friends. Tell me everything." So she did. They sat together on the massive bed that dominated one corner of his chambers, and she told him about her life, about growing up in foster care, about fighting her way through nursing school while working 2 jobs, about the patients who broke her heart and the ones who gave her hope. He listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he genuinely cared about the answers. In turn, he told her about his own past, about being turned during a war 3 centuries ago, about clawing his way up through vampire society until he was strong enough to challenge for the throne, about the loneliness of immortality, the weight of responsibility, the constant struggle to be better than the violent nature that came with being a predator. "I feed from blood banks now," he admitted. "Donated blood, freely given even if the donors do not know where it ends up. It is not the same as feeding from a living source, but it is enough. I will not take from you, Brielle. I will not make you into my prey. What if I wanted you to? The question surprised them both. She felt her cheeks heat. I mean, not to hurt me, but if it's part of what you are, part of how vampires bond with their partners. It can be intensely intimate, he said carefully. More intimate than any human act. To share blood is to share essence, to connect on a level that transcends the physical. But it can also be dangerous. The bloodlust is always there, always waiting for a moment of weakness. I could drain you dry before I realized what I was doing. You won't, though. You're too controlled for that. You have remarkable faith in me. I have faith in what I see. And I see someone who has spent centuries mastering himself, who stopped massacres because he believed in something better. You're not going to lose control and hurt me, Valdren. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I pray you are right, because the thought of harming you is more terrifying than any enemy I have ever faced. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with Brielle. The adrenaline of the night had worn off, leaving her drained. Valdren noticed her yawning and insisted she rest. Sleep, he urged, pulling back the covers. You are safe here. I will watch over you. She wanted to protest that she should go back to her apartment, to her normal life. But the truth was, she didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay here in this impossible sanctuary with this impossible man who had somehow become essential to her in the span of days. So she climbed into his bed, which was ridiculously comfortable, and let herself drift off while he sat beside her, one cool hand stroking through her hair. She woke to find sunlight streaming through the window. Impossible since they were underground. Then she realized it wasn't real sunlight, but some kind of magical simulation designed to provide a day-night cycle for the sanctuary. Valdren was gone, but there was a note on the pillow beside her. Had to attend to court business. Seraphine will bring you breakfast and help you settle in. I will return as soon as I can. V. Brielle smiled at the note, then yelped as there was a knock on the door. Seraphine entered carrying a tray laden with food that smelled amazing. Good morning, consort. I thought you might be hungry. The vampire set the tray down with a flourish. I had the kitchens prepare a selection. I was unsure of your preferences. This is incredible, thank you. Brielle sat up, suddenly aware she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. And you don't have to call me consort. Brielle is fine. As you wish. Seraphine settled into a chair with the ease of someone who had every right to be there. I suppose we should discuss your new position and what it entails. Over breakfast, Seraphine explained the intricacies of vampire court politics. As Valdren's consort, Brielle would be expected to attend certain functions, to learn the major players and alliances, to represent the king when he could not be present. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. There will be those who seek to use you against him, Seraphine warned. Those who see you as a weakness to exploit. You must be careful, vigilant. Trust no one except those Valdren has personally vouched for. And who does that include? Myself, Cassius, and perhaps a handful of others. The king has few true allies, I'm afraid. Most serve him out of fear or ambition, not loyalty. She paused. But he has chosen well in you, I think. You have steel in your spine that many vampires lack. I'm just trying not to mess this up. You will. Inevitably, we all do. Seraphine's smile was almost kind. But what matters is that you recover from your mistakes and learn. The king needs someone who will challenge him, who will see him as more than just a crown and a throne. You do that. So continue being yourself, and trust that it is enough. The next several days passed in a blur. Brielle moved what few possessions she had from her apartment into Valdren's chambers. She met with various court officials, learning names and faces and the complex web of relationships that governed vampire society. And she spent every possible moment with Valdren himself, learning him as thoroughly as he learned her. They fell into a rhythm. He would handle court business during what passed for daytime in the sanctuary, while she explored or read or talked with the few vampires who were willing to be friendly. In the evenings, they would share meals, her eating mortal food while he drank blood from crystal glasses that made it look almost civilized. and at night they would retreat to his chambers and talk for hours, sharing histories and dreams and fears. The physical intimacy grew gradually. Kisses that started gentle and became heated, touches that mapped the landscape of each other's bodies. The first time they made love, Valdren was so careful with her that she wanted to cry, treating her like she might shatter at any moment. She had to coax him into letting go of some of that control, into trusting that she was stronger than she looked. After, as they lay tangled together in his massive bed, he traced patterns on her skin and spoke quietly. "I never thought I would have this. Someone to share myself with completely. Someone who sees all of me, monster and man, and does not turn away." "You're not a monster," she kissed his shoulder. "You're just different, and I happen to like different." 3 weeks into her new life, the first real test came. A delegation from the Eastern courts arrived, ostensibly to discuss trade agreements, but really to assess the situation with the human consort. Their leader was a vampire named Lucian, who oozed charm and danger in equal measure. Brielle attended the formal reception on Valdren's arm, wearing a gown that Seraphine had insisted was appropriate for court functions. It was deep blue and made her feel like a princess, though she couldn't shake the sense that she was playing dress-up. Lucian approached them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "King Valdren, how good to see you looking so well. And this must be the famous human consort we have heard so much about. Brielle, this is Lucian Nightborn, representative of the Eastern courts. Lucian, my consort, Brielle Sinclair." Brielle extended her hand, remembering Seraphine's coaching about formal greetings. Lucian took it and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that lingered a bit too long. "Charmed, truly. Though I must confess, I'm surprised to see a mortal standing so high at court. Tell me, Miss Sinclair, how does one such as yourself capture the attention of our esteemed king?" The question was a trap, designed to make her seem either arrogant or unworthy. She felt Valdren tense beside her, but kept her voice light. "I suppose the same way anyone captures anyone's attention, by being myself and hoping that's enough. So far it seems to be working." "Indeed." Lucian's eyes gleamed with something predatory. "And you are not frightened, living among creatures who could drain you in seconds?" "Should I be? King Valdren has made it very clear that I'm under his protection, unless you're suggesting that protection is insufficient?" The challenge was subtle but clear. Lucian's smile widened. "Not at all. I simply marvel at your courage, or perhaps your foolishness. The line between the two is often thin." "Enough, Lucian." Valdren's voice was cold. "If you have concerns about my choice of consort, voice them plainly or move along. These games bore me." "No games, my king. Merely curiosity." Lucian inclined his head. "I wish you both well, though I wonder how long this unprecedented arrangement can last before reality intrudes." He drifted away into the crowd, leaving Brielle feeling shaken. Valdren pulled her closer, his arms secure around her waist. "You handled that well. He hates me, hates us. He fears what we represent, change, evolution, the possibility that the old ways might not be the only ways." Valdren pressed a kiss to her temple. "Let him fear. We will prove him wrong simply by enduring." But Lucian's words stayed with her. How long could this last? She was mortal, aging every day while Valdren remained frozen in immortal perfection. Already she could see the subtle differences when she looked in the mirror. A line here, a shadow there. Nothing dramatic yet, but the reminder that time was not on their side. That night, after the reception had ended and they were alone, she broached the subject that had been haunting her. "Valdren, I've been thinking about the turning." He went very still. "Brielle, we discussed this. It is too dangerous, too unpredictable. I know what you said, but I also know that every day I stay human is a day closer to the end, and I don't want this to end. I want forever with you, not just a handful of years." "You do not know what you are asking." He pulled away from her, pacing the room like a caged animal. "The turning is not some romantic gesture. It is death and rebirth in the most literal sense. You would lose everything you are, everything that makes you human. Your warmth, your heartbeat, your ability to walk in sunlight, your very soul might be forfeit. Or I might become like you, strong, immortal, able to stand beside you as an equal rather than a protected mortal who everyone sees as your weakness. You are not my weakness," he rounded on her. "He his eyes blazing. You are my strength, your humanity, your compassion, your gentle heart. These are the things that remind me why I fight for a better world. If you lost those in the turning, I would never forgive myself. And if I die of old age while you watch, will you forgive yourself for that? She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. I'm not saying we have to do it now, but at least tell me it's possible, that when the time comes, when I'm ready, you would consider it. He closed his eyes, anguish written across his features. I cannot lose you. Not to death, not to the darkness of the turning. I cannot. Then help me live. She brought his hands to her lips, kissing each knuckle gently. Help me become something that can stay with you, please. Valdren, don't make me beg. You would give up the sun for me? Give up warmth and mortality and everything you have ever known? In a heartbeat. Because the sun means nothing if I have to enjoy it without you. Because warmth is useless if you're not there to share it. Because mortality is just a countdown to losing everything I've come to love. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. If we do this, it will be years from now. I need time to prepare, to research the safest methods, and you need time to be certain this is truly what you want. I'm certain now. You are young and in love and not thinking clearly. Give it time. If in 5 years you still feel the same, we will discuss it again. He pulled back to look at her face. Can you agree to that? 5 years felt like an eternity, but she could see the fear in his eyes and knew she couldn't push harder. Not now. 5 years, and then we talk about it seriously. 5 years, he agreed. And in the meantime, I will make every day worth living. I will give you adventures and experiences and love beyond measure. I will make certain that if you choose this path, it is from joy rather than fear. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and determination into it. They made love slowly, tenderly, as if trying to memorize each other's bodies. And afterward, as she drifted to sleep in his arms, she felt at peace with their decision. 5 years was enough time to be sure, enough time to prepare, enough time to build a foundation strong enough to survive the transformation. The months that followed were the happiest of Brielle's life. She learned to navigate vampire politics, made tentative friendships with some of the more open-minded court members, and grew comfortable in a role as Valdren's consort. There were challenges, of course, vampires who resented her presence, moments of danger when enemies tried to use her against Valdren, long nights when he had to attend to crises that kept them apart. But there was also joy. Valdren took her to places she'd never imagined, secret vampire enclaves in different cities, ancient libraries filled with forbidden knowledge, gardens that bloomed only at night with flowers that glowed in the darkness. He taught her about vampire history and culture, shared secrets of his long life, and listened with genuine interest when she talked about medicine and healing. She started a clinic in the sanctuary, offering medical care to the few humans who served the vampire court, and even treating vampires when they came back injured from battles or disputes. It gave her purpose beyond just being Valdren's consort, made her feel like she was contributing something valuable to this strange new world she'd joined. A year passed, then 2. Brielle turned 28, then 29. The age difference between her appearance and Valdren's began to level out. He looked eternally 35, and she was approaching that herself. But she knew it wouldn't last. In another decade, she would start to look older, while he remained unchanged. The thought bothered her less than it once had. She had time, years to spend with him, and she intended to enjoy every moment. The subject of turning came up occasionally, but Valdren always deflected, and she let him. Their agreement had been 5 years, and she would honor that. In the 3rd year, everything changed. A new threat emerged from the northern territories. A vampire named Kyle the Merciless had united the various factions that opposed Valdren's rule and was marching on the capital with an army. The report said he commanded thousands of vampires and human thralls, all fanatically loyal and bent on restoring the old ways of culling and terror. The sanctuary prepared for war. Valdren sent out calls to his allies, fortified their defenses, and began training every vampire capable of fighting. The atmosphere grew tense and dark, all pretense of normalcy abandoned as they prepared for the coming storm. Brielle threw herself into preparations, setting up triage areas and stockpiling medical supplies. She worked alongside Seraphine and Cassius, who had become genuine friends over the years. They tried to shield her from the worst of the planning, but she insisted on knowing everything. If she was going to be Valdren's consort, she needed to understand the full scope of what they faced. The night before the battle, Valdren came to find her in the clinic. She was organizing bandages and trying not to think about all the ways the next day could go wrong. "You should rest," he said quietly from the doorway. "So should you." She set down the bandages and turned to face him. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen before, the weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders. "Come here." He crossed to her and let her pull him into her arms. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other. Finally, he spoke. "If something happens to me tomorrow—" "Don't," she pulled back to look at his face. "Don't you dare start saying goodbye. I need you to listen. If I fall, Cassius will take command. He will protect you and get you out of the sanctuary to safety. There are contingency plans in place, resources set aside for you. You will be cared for." "I don't care about resources. I care about you." She cupped his face in her hands. "You don't get to leave me, Valdren. We have a deal. 5 years, remember. You promised me 5 years before we even discussed turning, which means you have to survive at least 2 more years. So you're going to go out there tomorrow, and you're going to win, and you're going to come back to me. Those are your orders." Despite everything, he smiled. "You dare command a king?" "I dare command the man I love. The king can take care of himself." She kissed him fiercely. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise I will fight with everything I have to return to you." It wasn't quite the promise she had asked for, but she knew it was all he could give. They made love that night with a desperation neither had shown before, as if they could somehow ward off the future through the intensity of their connection. Afterward, Valdren held her while she slept, and she felt safe despite the looming danger. Dawn came too quickly. Valdren left before she woke, not wanting to disturb her rest. She found a note on his pillow. "I love you. Wait for me." The battle began at dusk. Brielle stayed in the clinic with the other healers, listening to the distant sounds of combat and trying not to imagine the worst. The wounded started arriving within the first hour. Vampires with grievous injuries, humans who had been caught in the crossfire, even a few of the enemy who Cassius's forces had captured and brought back for questioning. She worked without stopping, suturing wounds, setting bones, administering blood transfusions to the vampires who needed them. Hour after hour passed in a blur of medical procedures and desperate prayers. She kept asking for news of Valdren, but no one seemed to know anything concrete. Finally, as midnight approached, Seraphine appeared in the clinic doorway. Her clothes were torn and blood-stained, her face grim. "Come with me." "Now." Brielle's heart stopped. "Is he alive? But you need to come, quickly." She dropped the bandages she'd been holding and ran. Seraphine led her through corridors she barely recognized, past devastation that spoke of fierce fighting. They emerged into what had once been the throne room, now scorched and damaged almost beyond recognition. In the center of the room, surrounded by guards, lay Valdren. He was conscious but barely, his body covered in wounds that should have been fatal. Cassius knelt beside him, trying to stem the bleeding, but it was clear that conventional healing wasn't going to be enough. Brielle dropped to her knees beside them, her medical training warring with her panic. What happened? Kyle wielded an ancient weapon, a blade forged specifically to kill vampire royalty. Cassius's voice was tight. "The wounds won't heal naturally. We're losing him." "No." She looked at Valdren's face, at the pain etched there. "There has to be something we can do. A ritual, a spell, something." Valdren's hand found hers, his grip weak. "Brielle, my love, listen to me. Don't you dare give up. We had a deal, remember? 5 years. You promised." "I'm sorry." Each word seemed to cost him immense effort, "but I do not think I can keep that promise. The blade, it is killing me slowly. I can feel the darkness closing in." "Then turn me. Now. Tonight." The words burst from her before she could think them through. "If you're dying, if you need strength, take mine. Turn me and use the bond to heal yourself." "The bond doesn't work that way," Seraphine said gently. Turning you would only weaken him further when he needs all his strength to survive. Then what do we do? Brielle looked around at the assembled vampires desperately. There has to be something. You're all ancient and powerful. Someone must know a way to save him. Cassius and Seraphine exchanged a look. Finally, Cassius spoke. There is one possibility. A forbidden ritual from the old times. It would bind his life force to yours, anchoring him to the mortal world through your vitality. It might give him the strength to heal. Then do it. You do not understand the cost. The ritual would tie your lives together completely. If one of you dies, so does the other, and it would mark you as his in a way that goes beyond the consort bond. You would feel his emotions, his hunger, his pain, and he would feel yours. There would be no privacy, no separation. You would be bound in every way that matters. Brielle looked down at Valdren, at the man she loved dying in front of her. I don't care. If it saves him, do it. Brielle, no. Valdren tried to sit up and failed. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me. The ritual is irreversible. You would be trapped with me forever. Good. That's what I want anyway, forever with you. She leaned down until their faces were inches apart. Stop trying to protect me from my own choices. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Now, let them perform the ritual before you die and make a liar out of me about our deal. He searched her face for a long moment, then nodded weakly. Very well. If this is truly your choice, I will honor it. The ritual was complex and painful. Seraphine and Cassius worked together, drawing symbols in blood on the floor around them, chanting in a language Brielle didn't recognize. When they cut her palm and pressed it to Valdren's, she felt a shock of power rush through her entire body. The world exploded into sensation. She could feel everything Valdren felt, the agony of his wounds, the weakness of his fading strength, but also his love for her, fierce and all-consuming. It was overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful. And beneath it all, she could feel something else, the darkness of the blade's poison, trying to pull him down into death. She pushed back against it instinctively, pouring her own life force into him through the bond. It felt like giving away pieces of herself, but she didn't care. She would give him everything if it meant he survived. The ritual reached a crescendo. Light burst from their joined hands, so bright she had to close her eyes. When it faded, she felt different, changed. She could still feel Valdren through the bond, but the pain had lessened. His wounds were beginning to close, the poison retreating before the combined force of their joined vitality. He gasped and sat up, his eyes wide with wonder. Brielle, I can feel you. Everything you are, everything you feel. It is incredible. I know, I can feel you too. She laughed shakily. Is it always going to be this intense? It will settle with time, become more manageable. But yes, we will always be aware of each other. He pulled her into his arms, and through the bond, she felt his overwhelming relief and gratitude. You saved my life. Again. How many times must you rescue me, little healer? As many times as it takes. She held him tightly, feeling his strength returning moment by moment. Did we win? Is Kale defeated? He's dead by my hand, and his army has scattered. The threat is ended, Cassius spoke from behind them. Thanks in no small part to your willingness to perform that ritual. The power surge from the bonding gave Valdren the edge he needed to deliver the killing blow. Seraphine knelt beside them, her expression serious. You understand what you have done, Brielle? This bond cannot be broken. Your mortality is now tied to his immortality. You will age, but far more slowly than before. You may live centuries before you begin to show the effects of time. And when she does age, when the time comes, she will be turned. Valdren's voice left no room for argument. I will not lose her to old age, and with the bond in place, the turning will be far safer. Her essence is already intertwined with mine. The transformation will simply complete what we have begun. Brielle felt a surge of love through the bond and sent her own feelings back to him. So we get our forever after all. It would seem so. He kissed her gently, and she could feel his emotions mirror her own joy, relief, love so deep it made her dizzy. Though I suspect our forever will be far from peaceful. He wasn't wrong. The years that followed were filled with challenges as they worked to rebuild and reform vampire society in the wake of Cale's rebellion. But they faced everything together, the bond between them growing stronger and more natural with time. Brielle learned to navigate the constant awareness of Valdren's presence in her mind and heart, and he learned to open himself to her completely in return. She ran her clinic, healing those who needed it and proving to the skeptical that a human could contribute meaningfully to vampire society. Valdren continued his reforms, using the victory over Kyle as leverage to push through changes that made vampire society more just and less brutal. Together, they became a symbol of what was possible when different worlds came together in good faith. 20 years after their bonding, Brielle looked in the mirror and saw a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, despite being nearly 50. The bond had slowed her aging to a crawl, giving them the time Valdren had promised. But she could see the first hints of silver in her hair, the first fine lines around her eyes. It was time. She found Valdren in their chambers, reading by candlelight. Through the bond, she didn't need to speak her request aloud. He felt it the moment she made her decision. "Are you certain?" he asked, setting the book aside. "Once begun, there's no turning back." "I've never been more certain of anything." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "I've had 20 years to think about it, to prepare. I'm ready to become what you are, to truly walk beside you as an equal. You have always been my equal." But he was already standing, already moving toward the door to summon Seraphine and the others they would need. "Very well. If this is your choice, we will do it properly, with all the protections and safeguards in place." The turning was every bit as agonizing as he'd warned her it would be. 3 days of feeling her mortal body die piece by piece, of burning from the inside out as vampire venom rewrote her very cells. But through it all, she could feel Valdren through the bond, could draw strength from his presence. He never left her side, murmuring encouragement and love, helping her stay anchored to sanity when the pain threatened to tear her apart. When she finally woke on the 4th day, the world had transformed. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer, scents more complex than she'd ever imagined, and the constant ache of mortality, the knowledge that every moment was bringing her closer to death, was gone. She felt strong, powerful, eternal. Valdren was there when she opened her eyes, which had turned the same crimson red as his. He looked at her with such love and pride that it stole her unnecessary breath. "Welcome to immortality, my love." She sat up, marveling at the ease of the movement, the lack of the small aches and pains that had always accompanied being human. "I feel incredible. Is it always like this?" "The first days are always the most intense. You will need to learn control, to manage the bloodlust and the enhanced senses, but you will adapt quickly." He pulled her to her feet. "Come, see yourself." She looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her skin had gone pale as moonlight, her hair lightened to a silvery blonde, but her features were still her own, just perfected, refined into something otherworldly. She looked like she belonged at Valdren's side now, matched in both power and presence. "I'm beautiful," she whispered in wonder. "You always were. Now the outside simply matches what I have always seen inside." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and through the bond, she felt his complete contentment. "We have eternity now, my Brielle. What shall we do with it?" "Everything." She leaned back against him, watching their reflections in the mirror. 2 vampires, 2 immortals, bound together by choice and love and an unbreakable bond. "We'll do everything together." And they did. Over the centuries that followed, they transformed vampire society from within, making it more just, more compassionate, more integrated with the mortal world. Brielle's clinic grew into a hospital, then a network of hospitals that served both humans and vampires. Valdren's reign became legendary, known as the era when the old brutality gave way to a new age of cooperation and mutual respect. They had adventures, traveled the world, made friends and enemies in equal measure. They fought battles when necessary and built peace when possible. And through it all, they had each other, the bond between them a constant source of strength and joy. Sometimes, when they walked through the sanctuary that had become their true home, Brielle would think back to that first night when she'd stumbled through a hidden door and found a wounded vampire king bleeding on a marble floor. She'd bound his wounds with gentle hands, never knowing that she was binding her own fate to his in the process. It had started with a touch, with choosing compassion over fear, and it had grown into a love that would span centuries, a partnership that would change the world, and a bond that nothing, not time, not death, not the opposition of an entire society could break. Valdren caught her reminiscing through the bond and pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking about, my love?" "The beginning. How far we've come from that night." "We have come far indeed, but the journey is far from over." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that she had learned to treasure. "What shall our next adventure be?" She looked at him, at the man who had become her entire world, and felt nothing but joy at the infinity of possibilities stretching before them. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." "Always together," he agreed, "from that first touch until the end of time itself." And in the sanctuary beneath the city, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had forged, the vampire king and his eternal consort stood together, ready for whatever came next. The wounds of that first battle had long since healed, but neither of them would ever forget how it had begun with gentle hands binding injuries, and a touch soft enough to make even an immortal king flinch with wonder at the possibility of being treated with tenderness. It was that gentleness, that willingness to see past the monster to the man beneath, that had started everything. And it was that same love, grown and strengthened over years and decades and centuries, that would carry them forward into whatever eternity held. The end of their story was really just another beginning, another chapter in a tale that would never truly conclude, because some loves are meant to be eternal, and some bonds are strong enough to transcend even death itself. Theirs was both, forged in blood and sealed with trust, a romance that had begun in darkness and blossomed into light. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, Valdren would take Brielle's hand and marvel at how warm it still felt against his skin, how her touch still made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Well, that was a secret they kept between themselves, shared through a bond that made them more than the sum of their parts. They were king and consort, vampire and former human, immortal and eternal. But more than any of that, they were simply two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to bind themselves together in every way that mattered. And that, in the end, was the greatest magic of all.